Today we're going to talk about why almost everybody's brains are completely fried. I call it the modern day brain freeze. And it's way worse than the effects of cigarettes and alcohol. In fact, our current generation's screen addiction is arguably way worse than previous addiction epidemics like cigarettes or alcohol. And we thought that we are better than the previous generation, however. Is that really the case? When we were in high school, we've all heard about these lectures and these movies about terrible effects of cigarettes and how this entire cigarette industry was shielded and protected and lobbied to trick the general population into consuming cigarettes. In fact, there were studies proving that cigarettes do not cause cancer. And of course, later it was found out that these doctors and these scientists who conducted these studies were paid off, or the entire study was sponsored by the cigarette companies. So there was an obvious conflict of interest. And we thought we evolved beyond that, and we thought that we are immune to this type of coercion in the future. However, they got us again with the phone addiction, which is, again, as I said before, arguably way worse than cigarettes and alcohol because it steals one of the most, if not the most precious resource that we have is our time. So doom scrolling, staring at screens and watching content all day is one of the worst things that you can do, especially doom scrolling, because I think everybody knows, just start doom scrolling and 4 hours later, you just have this brain freeze. You didn't learn anything. It was mildly pleasant, maybe even got some low-grade anxiety from it, and it's just gone. The dopamine hit is gone, and there's a crash. That's why I think that short-form content is modern-day drugs. It's that bad, and I think in 20 or 30 years, there will be some sort of regulation about screen time, short-form content, or something like that. So the story about the cigarette industry will repeat once again. So just like 50 years ago, the cigarettes companies were paying actors to smoke in movies, normalizing and promoting smoking. Just like these companies were paying to doctors and scientists to claim that cigarettes do not cause cancer. It was all found to be a lie. The same thing right now. It's normalized to watch reels, to watch brain rot. In fact, Meta and YouTube have entire labs trying to engineer the algorithm to be as addictive as possible. Now, everybody almost became like a lab rat. Everybody's online habits and content habits are constantly being monitored and dissected to improve this giant addictive algorithm. It's honestly insane. And the worst thing is that it affects kids. Since attention became the new currency, these companies use all sorts of predatory practices to increase screen time so that they can sell more ads. And it's all done at the expense of people's attention span and, quite honestly, brain health. There's even a graph showing the exact correlation between introduction of iPhones and teens' anxiety. It's just crazy. Phones cause anxiety. Screen time causes more anxiety. So I think the best thing everybody can do is just reduce their screen time. And of course, because of somebody's addiction, on the other hand, somebody's getting rich. The cigarette companies are getting rich, and lots of creators got pretty rich. I've made millions of dollars producing content for YouTube, so someone say that I am part of the problem, but that's just how the system works. Most of the channels that I was managing were making educative content and sort of intellectual content. I call it edutainment. You're educating somebody about history, geography, politics, while making the video entertaining. The real problem is stupid brain rot that just doesn't add any value to somebody's life. But even me, somebody who made millions of producing content, I still feel the effects of this screen addiction and brain rot because I had to research, had to supervise everything, and the amount of information and content and looking through all kinds of articles just creates this weird brain freeze. I've noticed myself that over the years I've developed mild version of this brain freeze too. So that affects everybody. Especially the younger generation, Gen Z and Gen Alpha. If you really talk to them, sometimes they cannot even form a coherent sentence. Sometimes they cannot even tell a story because they've been passively consuming so much content that they're basically incapable of just saying one straight sentence describing what happened yesterday. It's very weird. Brain freeze phenomenon that's particularly prevalent in Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And I think it's a direct result of screen addiction and brain rot content. And that's the most twisted part. If you are producing content, you are rewarded. If you do everything right, if you follow the right steps, you can make millions just purely off AdSense, just purely off ads, without even taking into account merch sales and sponsorships and promotions. And user-generated content industry just keeps expanding and expanding. It actually gets bigger and bigger every year because YouTube basically replaces TV. I even believe that it will replace Netflix because even for Netflix, they have to spend millions to produce a show. However, an entertaining person online or even a faceless channel online can generate the same amount of watchable content. So YouTube and user-generated content in general already replaced most of the TV. Nobody even watches TV anymore. And I think it will get even more extreme. So even though most people have the brain freeze and most people watch too much stuff, they spend too much time on their screens, you still better be the producer of the content rather than a consumer. By not producing content for the internet, you're not actually solving the problem. You're just missing out on making some real money, especially if your content is educational. Actually, real humans need to produce more content to defeat the AI slop. The AI slop is actually the biggest threat to the internet right now because it's like a cancer that spreads across YouTube. There's so many AI slop channels, it's actually insane. So that's why I think more and more people have to generate and produce content themselves to defeat the AI slop. It's the old story that you want to be the dealer of the addictive thing, not the one who actually consumes it. So although I've produced probably tens of thousands of hours of content and I've made millions from it, I recognize that it's a huge problem and it affected even my brain just supervising all of this. And just like with other regulated substances like alcohol and cigarettes, adults can make their own choices. However, kids have to be protected from these predatory companies like Meta, YouTube, and TikTok from basically destroying their brain early and impairing their brain development with particularly short-form content. I know it became a meme that humans have an attention span less than a goldfish. But this is not a meme, that's reality, that's an actual problem. Most of the content that I've made millions of is long-form content and it's pretty educational, it's edutainment. Right now, watching a long-form video feels like an accomplishment because so much of the content now is short-form. And for some reason, it's just designed this way. It's optimized by the algorithm to create this weird dopamine hit and then post-high anxiety. It's really weird. And watching a full-length movie is like a feat that deserves a medal. That's how bad screen addiction has gotten. It's particularly bad with the younger generation. Some of my really young siblings can't even watch a full movie. They just get bored and start watching their phones. It's actually crazy. When I was a kid, my parents used to complain that I watched too much TV, that I watched too many movies, but at least I could watch them all the way through from start to the end. It all comes down to the old dilemma: is it really moral and acceptable to sell alcohol or other addictive and exploitative substances or things like loans, casinos, cigarettes, alcohol? They all go to the same category. And I think now we have to think about short form content in particular in the exact same way. There's obviously a demand for this sort of thing, and in excess, it's very damaging and addictive. In excess, screen addiction and particularly short form content can negatively affect other aspects of your life. So probably these things should be treated the same way as alcohol and cigarettes, and the most vulnerable populations have to be somewhat protected from it. Because the brain freeze effect is real, and obviously adults can make their own decisions, and they should be able to make their own decisions. Vulnerable populations have to be protected. But there's always two sides of the story. Somebody's getting their attention span completely destroyed, somebody's life is getting completely wrecked by screen time, but on the other hand, other people are making millions of it, and it's not because they're bad, the system is set up in this way. Since content is the gateway to everything else in the economy right now, we live in the content economy. You have to be the dealer, not the consumer. You have to be creating content and have really strict habits about consuming it. Me, for example, I do not consume any content at all, almost nothing. And I've noticed personally, the less I watch, the less I check, the better. In fact, I don't even post this stuff that I'm recording right now by myself. I send it to my assistant and they edit it and then they post it. I don't even touch it because I just want to reduce my screen time as much as possible.